Assembly chamber. Sound. 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 Assembly chamber. Signed. 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 Assembly chamber. Sound. 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 Assembly chamber. Assembly chamber. Signed. 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 Assembly chamber. Sound. 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 Assembly chamber. Sound.
Chamber. The committee will be asked to consider a written briefing from the Department on
Assembly chamber. Sound.
Okay, colleagues, and those who will be joining us in the public gallery, the rules of what is required during the committee setting are set out. Do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Mr. Nesbitt and Mr. Buckley.
Okay, happy to note. Declarations of interest, members. Are there any declarations that any member wishes to make? If not, chairperson's business. So, number of things, members. Yesterday I spoke on behalf of the committee in response to the budget. A couple of other comments I made. If the committee are happy to formally correspond those, firstly to Minister Murphy to welcome him back into post from his recovery from a recent illness, and secondly to Mr. Nesbitt to thank him for the service to the committee. Are members content? Thank you. The draft minutes, members, at page 6 of your pack, setting out our deliberations on the 22nd of May. Are members content that I approve those minutes as a true and accurate record of the committee's meeting? Thank you. Item 5, members, then, is matters arising. Are there any matters arising that members wish to raise at this stage? No? Okay. Item 6, then, members, is Department for the Economy, written evidence on dual market access. Members can consider the written briefing from the Department on research that it had commissioned in respect of enhancing dual market accesses for business in Northern Ireland. The clerk's covering note is at page 19. Are members content to note the written report? Okay, thank you. Item 7 then, members, delegated legislation, debt relief order. Advise members that the department is to lay a statutory rule, the Insolvency Monetary Limits Amendments Order Northern Ireland 2024, which is outlined at the clerk's cover note at page 128. The proposed rule will be subject to the draft affirmative resolution procedure. The proposed rule relates to the debt relief scheme and will change the related prescribed monetary limits that an individual must meet if they are to be eligible. Members will remember we had a briefing on this from a number of organisations. Does members have any questions or concerns about this? If not, members, can I propose that we'll ask the committee if it's content that the department makes the associated rule. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 8 then, members of correspondence. Refer members to page 135 or summary index provided at item 1 of the correspondence section. Members are content we can dispose of all these correspondence in line with the suggestion in the index, but happy if any member wants to raise any individual item within correspondence. If not, are we content then that we dispose of those as suggested in the index? Okay, that is agreed. We then go to the forward work plan, members. There are a number of individuals around the table who on the 4th of July may be a busy date for them. We currently have an available option to postpone the meeting that was due to take place on the 3rd of July, and then before recess the last committee meeting will be the week before. Are members content that the meeting on the 3rd of July of committee doesn't go ahead owing to the general election the next day? Okay. Yep, perfect. Okay, thank you. Anything you want to add on that?
Chair, just to advise members that, next week the department has advised that they don't want to come and brief about debt relief orders as there's further work ongoing. Additionally, they are not prepared to brief on their business plan, but they will brief on the budget because they say it's a work in progress. Additionally then, on the 12th of June, if members look, what we've got is the hospitality sector, Hospitality Ulster, and the UEPC talking about tourism issues. So I think that report was on the news this morning. So we'll get it on the 12th of June. But the department has asked to delay the briefing on the potential changes to the postgraduate award scheme until after summer recess. And what's the other thing? Is so on the 19th then we would have Dr Lisa Wilson on good jobs and the department talking about technology clusters, and then the 26th, which would be our final meeting, would be the minister, so that the what the department has asked is that the briefing on fracking would be moved to, I think, the 12th of June, if I've got that right. Yeah, so we would have Hospitality Ulster, Economic Policy Centre and fracking, so quite a lot about tourism and then the fracking, and I think that's famous last words, but I think they're fairly straightforward. Members are content with what the department is doing, I think. Chair, if members are content with the forward work programme as amended, can I ask?
Members content? Okay, perfect. I'll then move to item 10. Any other business members wants to raise? If not, then we will begin our concurrent meeting at 10:30, and then the next scheduled meeting of the Economy Committee will be the 5th of June, and the committee will now adjourn until 10:30. Thank you, members.
is
not?
we are not. Whenever we're in public session, we'll make a start. Will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise anybody in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules, and it is not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So we will make a start. So I think I'll just begin by extending a formal welcome to everybody, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail at item 3, but we are all very welcome for this concurrent meeting of the Education and Economy Committees. We will go to item 1 first of all, which is apologies. So can I just ask members for any apologies that they're aware of?
So Mike Nesbitt, Jonathan Buckley.
Okay, thank you.
Has a funeral, so she may join us or may not.
Thank you, David. Catherine? And Pat Shane. Okay. Do we have any other apologies? Nope, that's great. So moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest that they would like to declare? Patrick?
Yeah, just to support the teacher and obviously receipt of
yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? No, not seeing any other indications. So item 3, chairperson's business. So this is my opportunity to formally welcome you to the joint concurrent meeting, and I hope that it will be perhaps the first of a number of engagements that the two committees have. There are so many areas of shared interest across the departmental portfolios, so I hope this is a springboard for further engagement over the course of this mandate. I would like to thank the Chair of the Economy Committee, Philip, for the invite to the Education Committee to hold this meeting, and to the Economy Committee Clerk for his support and assistance preparing for the meeting. And I think it would also be appropriate to thank the Speaker for making the Chamber available today for the committee meeting. It's nice to be able to have the opportunity to hold the committee meeting in this setting. So that is the formal welcome out of the way, and we do have a lot to get through today. So I will move on to item 4, and that is an oral evidence session from Dr Deirdre Hughes OBE. So you're very welcome at our concurrent committee meeting this morning, Dr Hughes, and we are looking forward to hearing your briefing on your work in relation to the independent review of careers guidance, which you were commissioned to undertake by the Department for the Economy. So in terms of how we'll go through this, I'll be inviting you to give an oral briefing. Unfortunately, we have no opportunity for a presentation. There's no facility for a screen to be used, so it will be an oral briefing. And I would ask for a presentation of around 10 minutes with a bit of latitude there, as there's maybe a fair bit to cover, but we'll look in around 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to questions and answers with members. We are going to have a lot of material to get through. Now, we don't have full attendance in the committee, so we have perhaps a little bit more time than we might have anticipated that we had today. But I would say, in the main, if we can aim to keep our question and the answer to around 5 minutes per member, so that we can get through the business today in a reasonable timescale. But really that is all at this stage, other than to refer members to the relevant sections of their pack. So we have a copy of the report, Transforming Career Support for Young People and Adults in Northern Ireland, that's at page 18. Information on international exemplars, page 158. And then a recent further education news article on investing in careers and decent work by Dr Hughes, and that's at page 170. There is also a clerk's cover note at page 7 in your packs. So that's the preamble done. So it's really time to hand over to Dr Hughes, and we'll hear your opening remarks and go from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Deirdre Hughes. I'm an independent researcher and an international specialist in all-age career support systems. My academic home is at Warwick University Institute for Employment Research. I'm also founding director of DMH Associates, who've undertaken quite a lot of research here in Northern Ireland on the all-age careers system. I also am director of Career Chat UK, which is a technology company. And I'm really delighted. I think this is a really exciting opportunity to have two committees come together, two departments come together to really look at the review of the evidence. I started working in mid-2021 to the end of March, where I consulted with over 4,000 young people and adults in Northern Ireland on the report Transforming All-Age Career Support for Young People and Adults. I won't go through all of it. I'm sure there may be questions that you will have, but if I just give a very sort of brief overview. And once I've done that, I'd like to set out 8 key challenges which we may wish to discuss more fully. So I think first of all, it's quite important that we understand that career guidance describes a range of services which actually help people of all ages to manage their careers and to make educational, training and occupational choices that are right for them. You know, you'll know people in your constituency. It helps with their ambitions, their interests, their qualifications and their skills. And the technique is to ensure that people can relate the knowledge that they've gained through schooling to a very fast changing world of work. Often there are differing opinions on career education and career guidance. The OEC definition of career guidance is, I think, a very useful compass in all of the discussions. And in essence, I think we'll probably get into some discussion about what are schools responsible for and indeed what is the career service responsible for. What's great in Northern Ireland is that you have got a statutory requirement under Article 20 of the Employment Northern Ireland Act, which does require the Department for Economy to provide career guidance in an impartial manner. And when we think about technological advances like artificial intelligence, fake news and many other things, if ever there was a time where we need access to impartial, trustworthy careers information, indeed it is now. Just very briefly to say the international evidence shows that government investment in career guidance does bring prosperity to individuals and windfalls to government. If even only a relatively small proportion of the population have access to this, we know that the evidence base that it does actually make a difference to outcomes, economic gains as well as social gains. If I just very quickly talk about finance and get that out of the way early on, the budget in Northern Ireland is £6 million, which is allocated for the National Career Service with around 100 careers advisors employed as civil servants. And really just want to draw your attention really to how that compares to other parts of the UK. So if, for example, we take a look at Scotland, Scotland has a budget of 50 million via Skills Development Scotland for its budget. Wales has a budget of 29 million via Careers Wales and Working Wales. And England has a budget of around 100 million, and that's a very conservative estimate there. So in essence, when we look at the investment in career guidance at the moment, here in Northern Ireland, it's about 2 times to 5 times less than in other parts of the UK. But I think the important thing to say is that the money that is invested here in Northern Ireland, working with a leading economist who's looked at whether do you get a return on investment for the money that is spent, and the answer is yes, then indeed it's very similar unit costs to other parts of the UK, and indeed for every pound in Northern Ireland that is spent, you're getting a £2 return. I think just very, very briefly to say that there's clear recognition really that at these levels of resource, the Department for Economy Careers Service simply can't deliver the level of personalised one-to-one support that many thousands of young people and adults and employers might want and expect in Northern Ireland. So I welcome this committee because it really does, I think, present an opportunity to think about the art of the possible going forward. And I think it's also important to say that even if skill levels balanced, in terms of the needs in Northern Ireland, there are not enough young people to be able to sort of coming through the system to fulfil that. So one of the important points I'd like to emphasise really is that perhaps now is the time to think about how talent pools can be accessed. And indeed, in many countries like Singapore, in Wales, in England, in Sweden, the debate is very much around how are we going to motivate adults, particularly adults with those middle skills, or adults who are highly skilled, whose jobs perhaps are at risk or that they are underemployed. And I think this is where there's an exciting opportunity to think about how can we refocus, how can we reframe the all-age career support system here in Northern Ireland. And I do think that the foundations are here. I'm very proud of Northern Ireland and the foundations that are here, but there is certainly scope to do more, to be more creative and more innovative. And I often say to people looking at all-age career systems, think of 4 E's. Think about how we're embedding careers in the curriculum. Think about enrichment activities for all. Think about employability and skills development. And think about enterprise self-employment and entrepreneurship. And where we actually look to other countries, and I've just finished a 15-country review and the province of New Brunswick in Canada, and taking into account what's happening here in Northern Ireland. There are strong advantages to having a national careers service, such as scalability, cost, consistency, and centralised expertise and resources. If we look at places like Austria and Switzerland, where there are cantons or municipalities, what we see is a proliferation of websites, careers websites, that some might argue that that resource, if done well centrally, can actually provide more savings but more impact for the citizens. And nearly all countries have what I would call hybrid models. So that's collaboration between a national career service and our education, our employment, and industry and labour markets. And so I said 10 minutes was my brief, so I've got lots to discuss, but I will come to an end really, and
if
just
you want to cover some more issues, we do have time. So
well, thank you. Yeah. Just to say, the big message is start early. The evidence base is clear, and we have got some new evidence in Northern Ireland. The Department of Education, I'm sure, will say more around career-related learning in primary schools, where just recently 32 schools have contributed over 1,400 children sharing their stories of their aspirations. And one of the main things from that particular piece of work is that there is technology that can be used to match employers and volunteers to be able to support schools to help with career-related learning. And I hope we can have a conversation around how technology can actually propel us forward around getting that closer relationship between education, the world of work, and indeed the added value of the career service in that. But just out of interest, I took a look at the data, and I noticed that 35% of the children are aspiring to culture, media and sports occupations. Footballers, very popular amongst young boys, and artists for girls. And again, in the report, it will say more. But we have to say, what does that say about the current projected new jobs in Northern Ireland? Only 1% of those children's aspirations who participated in the study. And this is why we see countries like England, Iceland, New Zealand, Sweden and Switzerland who are actually investing now in starting early. In the report that you have before you, there are 13 recommendations in there, and this was a report from 2022. I think it's quite useful sometimes to think about the careers system, which can be quite complex, lots of multiple players in the system, to think of it as a lifelong guidance system. And in essence, I think there are 3 major domains, to simplify it, that we can think about. One is services to young people, one is services to adults, and one is technology, our digital services. And I think if we focus on those 3 areas and we sort of think about what could we do more that would help move us now at this crucial moment in time where there is fantastic opportunity, I believe, for Northern Ireland to be at the very, very forefront. There certainly are opportunities, I think, to make the visibility of careers more. And I'm going to finish by the 8 challenges that I see. Challenge number 1 is the career service is a universal service, but in terms of awareness, engagement and take-up, it's not universal for all young people and adults. So there's a challenge. Secondly, there's only so much resource available, and in these difficult times, the trick is to see how can we get a balanced service that serves the needs of young people and indeed adults. And when I say that, I mean parents, adults in work and outside of work. I think thirdly, the challenge is how can we strengthen, if you like, the Connected Careers dialogue, not just across the departments, but through the organisations in communities that are in receipt of funding for careers and employability support. And there are some interesting models to look at how that dialogue can be strengthened, alongside understanding better what are the student journeys. Where did these young people end up as a result of our schooling system? The 4th challenge I've mentioned, which is about supporting midlife careers support for adults. I met an employer yesterday who said, we took our eye off the ball and now we've got major staff shortages and an ageing workforce. Number 5, there's unclear roles and responsibilities. You know, what are schools responsible for? What are colleges, universities, and then the other parts of the system? Number 6, there is a lack, I think, of higher education, training and professional development in Northern Ireland compared to some other countries. So one anomaly from the research is Northern Ireland, out of the countries I reviewed, is the only place that doesn't have its own university, where it's building capacity across the system. People have to go either online or to England, Scotland, or indeed elsewhere. Number 7, we've got an ageing workforce. So we've really got to think about how we're going to tackle that ageing workforce, the quiet quitters and the great resignation, that we've got something in place where we have motivated our generation now and in the future. And then finally, I think one of the important things for us to really focus on is how can we bring the parts of the system together much better to get more impact and greater efficiency. And I do think that that's about cooperation, communication, and looking at the policy levers that you can use to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Dr Hughes. There's a lot to unpick there, and I think even out of those 8 challenges could keep us occupied for the remainder of the session. So I really appreciate you taking the time to go through that. I wanted to pick up with my first question was really, I think it was the challenge you identified there at number 5. The unclear rules and responsibilities. So just how the system interacts with itself and how the users in the system interact with it. You didn't really draw, I think, a major distinction between careers advice or careers advice and guidance and careers education in your report, although those roles are quite clearly delineated within the departments. Do you think there is scope to really merge those functions, to bring it under the responsibility of one department? I know the Independent Review of Education was quite clear that they felt actually in terms of the whole educational journey that really it needed to be under the umbrella of a single department, really, of lifelong learning from early years right through to adult learning. Thinking about careers specifically, do you see scope in that, or even at a lower level for careers advice in and of itself, given that it is so cross-cutting, across age demographics and different sectors within the education system? Would you be able to speak to whether you think there is scope for maybe bringing some of those functions together rather than keeping them in those departmental silos?
Yes, well, again, there are, if you look at different models in different countries, sometimes you find that careers does sit very much firmly in the Department of Education. In other cases, it does sit more towards the labour markets. I think the first thing I would say is sometimes it's very easy to think, right, we just move everything over here and this will make it better. I think it's much better to sort of look at the evidence base and really think about what could we achieve in the current system that we've got. And I do see, as an outsider looking in, I do see now an exciting opportunity for the departments to work more closely together. And I see examples of that already. One of the things to say is that when the report is published on the 15 country reviews, which I think will be very, very soon, you will see that for career education and career guidance, sometimes you have it sitting in public employment services, sometimes in education, sometimes in, if you like, economy. And I think one of the things that's most important is to think about what problem are we trying to fix here. And my observation when I look around the world and then I look at our system here at the moment is often people will say, well, where's the best system, Deirdre? Of course, there's never a silver bullet. But for example, there are some things which we know for sure is that it's notoriously very, very difficult for schools to deliver on career education, putting aside the impartial career guidance piece as well. So there's an argument not to have career guidance in schools for that impartiality aspect alone. But if we looked, for example, at Finland and we look at their system, in Finland, and this is only just one example, but Finland have not only legislation and statutory requirements for schools, but they have 76 hours of scheduled career education in their schools lower down, and that continues right through to upper secondary. There is an entitlement for individual guidance. And I think, again, if we looked at other countries, Iceland, again, for example, all these countries have got these same challenges. Teachers didn't come in to teach in education to become careers advisors. And this is one of our big challenges, I think, here. So my message is that rather than sort of thinking about, do we need to merge, though that is an option, and I think there would be scope to do some more detailing work on what that might look like, I think it's really important to look at, well, how can we create space for career education in the Northern Ireland curriculum? Wales went to what some might say a place of a brand new curriculum. Austria have done the same. And within Wales, for example, there's a very, very clear stream called Careers and Work-Related Experiences, and the statutory guidance and the curriculum is flexible enough for that to happen. I think the main message I would like to leave the committee to think about is the evidence base and what does it say about career education and how student outcomes can be improved. And if I just give you this example before I sort of read my notes, but it's simple. Volume really matters. The evidence shows that the more young people get exposed to career learning experiences from an early age, it makes a difference to their outcomes. And I think a report that just came out from the university in London, UCL, just on top of the OECD evidence, just mirrors what I'm about to say, which is basically the OECD looked at 8 countries, and it really looked at what makes a difference in terms of improved outcomes for young people. And they came up with a figure between 8 and 10 activities. And those activities are where you have career talks, you have assemblies, you have work-related experiences, you have a real rich diet that's consistent throughout the education programme. What we've got at the minute is we've got something where if one were to parody a careers advisor coming in at the end of the experience, almost trying to supplement a career education programme that perhaps was lacking. And we just know that the system, what we need to do is think about how can we increase the volume of those activities. And to increase the volume, we have to find space somewhere in that curriculum, and we have to find support for the teachers. So, for example, a way in which we can support teachers, again, using technology, is our lesson plans for careers. You know, if you're a maths teacher and you've suddenly been told, or the PE teacher, you're in charge of careers, you know, it's a big ask to go round a school and say, you know, you've got to do more careers, but I'm not really too sure yet how to do that. And I want to acknowledge the expertise of the great teachers in Northern Ireland who are doing really good work around careers work. But it is a very, very simple message. If we can get that diet of careers activities embedded in education on a much more regular basis, and I talked about Finland, you know, where the hours that they have allocated. If in Northern Ireland we even just said, look, there's about 20 or 30 hours of, if you like, career learning experiences. You know, you meet employers, you have assemblies, talks, group work, you get a one-to-one. If we could get that in place, what we could also do is we could track the impact of that very simply, survey young people year on year over a 4 to 5 year period. Is it making a difference? What's working? And I think we can use data science more now maybe than we have done in the past. But I think we would see a return on that. UCAS reported last year that 25% of young people regretted the choices that they made once they had made a transition. And I think our role is to try and help people have hope and opportunity, not regret that somehow the system failed them. And I do think that we can be very smart around this and keep it simple. Get more employers and volunteers into school, use technology to enable that to happen quick and easy for the teachers. And I do think that we can draw on lessons from other countries, for example, Estonia, where through online webinars, teachers, careers advisors, employability professionals come together on thematic issues to drive up their skills. But I do think it's a very big ask to expect teachers to do all of this. And finally, in Austria, they have just put in place educational and orientation coordinators in school to do a little bit of the heavy lifting that the teachers perhaps had been expected to do, particularly with those most in need. So I hope that answers your question. There are options available to you, and I would recommend that as a result of this, that some scoping out of those options could be done, and you could keep it simple or...
Question and more, I would have to say. I mean, I think from an educational perspective, the two main takeaways for me there, I think, is one around work experience, and I think that's something maybe for our committee to take away around the quality of offering of work experience and how accessible it is to all young people. So I think there is an issue. The feedback we get from young people is that it can be really, really difficult to secure a placement if your parents don't have the right connections, but also the system through the EA of accessing it is really cumbersome and puts a lot of employers off. So I think that's something for our committee to take away, and something maybe just I'd want to note. I have a slight concern if everything sits within schools, that around the different school types, that kids could be boxed into a certain pathway. Well, if you attend this school, then university and a profession is your pathway. If you go to this school, it'll be vocational, and the doors might be closed. I think we need to be really wary of closing doors for our children and young people, and I worry that sometimes the system we operate is closes doors rather than opens them. I'm not going to ask another question because that answer was so thorough. So I think at this stage I'll just pass over to the chair of the Economy Committee, Philip, for a question, and then we'll go to those.
Thank you, Nick, and Dr. Hughes, thank you very much for that. Maybe if I could just relate my experience of careers advice and then see if that's still the case. I was young once, but I'm not sure if that's still the case. So I attended a well-known grammar school in Belfast, and my careers advice was, this is how you complete a UCAS application, and this is the time at which you spend reading perspectives and magazines about the university to which you apply. And obviously, you know, that's a traditional pathway for many people to go down, but I never actually thought of what that career would be or what you would study. Maybe if I had better careers advice, I might not have ended up where I am today. But and then when you go to university, it's more about going through then the motions of obtaining that degree, and then at university you're not told then, well, with this degree, this is what you may wish or not wish to pursue. Is that still the experience in your view in many schools in Northern Ireland, that rather than advice, it's a guidance as to how you complete an application for university, and it's still seen as the only legitimate way in which at 18 you move on to, which is frankly not the case, and there's so many greater pathways out there, and to simply tell a young person that the only way in which they can get the career they want is by attending university. I'm just wondering, is that still your view, that that's the experiences of many young people in Northern Ireland?
I think there's two things to say on that. Firstly, during the pandemic, CEDEFOP, which is a major European organisation that brings experts together on career systems, highlighted Northern Ireland as an exemplar of good practice, that during the pandemic, Northern Ireland had a safety net for every young person, where a careers advisor contacted every young person. And that wasn't the case in all countries, and that was highlighted as an exemplar. I think one of the second point around your experience, it depends which school you go to and your diet of careers activities, really. There's clearly a challenge, not just in Northern Ireland, but sort of around the world, but specifically, I think, in the UK, around apprenticeships, parents understanding the added value of apprenticeships and other pathways beyond university. So I think what we have to do is attend more to how can we help people with this career exploration, and how can we ensure that a careers interview can be really meaningful for the individual. And I think going forward we can expose young people through technology, the whole range of different ways in which you can learn about careers, ranging from gaming, chatbot technology, podcasts, videos, meeting people, so that when they have that careers interview, that it can be really, really most effective. And I think one of the important things to say here is that there's a real opportunity now to get a narrative going in Northern Ireland around what great opportunities there are in Northern Ireland. And it does link back to that idea of how can we make career support more visible, not just for young people, but for the parents to be involved. And I'll give you one example. In Scotland recently, they had 8 webinars that were aimed at parents to help educate parents about the range of pathways. And they had over 3,000 parents who attended twilight sessions just to learn more about this. So I think what we've got to do is really raise our game now around the range of opportunities and to help people. Sometimes we always, there's regret in our lives in some ways, decisions maybe that we made, but I think our job now is for this generation of young people and adults to focus on where are the places and spaces in Northern Ireland for online and offline all-age career support. We have to think about services deep in communities that the man and woman on the street can recognise. And I have a few ideas on that which I'll come on to later. So celebrate, I think, what's good. I think clearly about what the role of schools, colleges, universities are when it comes to career education. The OECD uses that umbrella term. And I think what I have seen work very well is a partnership model where there's clarity around the roles and the responsibilities of an impartial career service that can bring that scalability and can bring that professional expertise through its skilled workforce. But we have to sort of scaffold the learning and pepper it more in our system.
No, that's perfect, thank you.
So Saoirse, you'd indicated next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to say from the outset, I really want to thank both chairs for facilitating this. Philip will know that we've spoken about this, and it's a big passion of mine in terms of careers and skills and jobs. My colleagues have touched on some of the broader things, so I just maybe want to try and be a wee bit focused. So you've talked there, Deirdre, about the National Career Service, that's in other places, touched on the importance of lifelong learning, the missing middle, which is what we sometimes talk about in terms of the economy, in terms of qualifications, mid-career transition due to a tight labour market, and barriers to access and talent due to immigration policy and other much more centrally held policy pieces. I believe, and the Chair can keep me right here, I think whenever we went through budget last week there was around $1 million set aside to scope for a careers portal, and you've talked about that a lot there. Starting early is important, and that should be reflected in the curriculum from primary onwards. You've also said about the need for jobs in the future that don't exist yet but need filled, and the need for collaborative working. You also talked about the importance of data capture, and actually I believe that Pivotal in the North have already started to gather some data from young people who maybe have, with a bit of hindsight, looked back and said, actually, I maybe wouldn't have chosen that. I also want to echo your concerns about teachers and the fact that this should not be a scenario where teaching staff feel that this is yet another that is put on top of them. I'm very keen that we address the issue of parity, which Philip has touched on. And I think if we look at continental Europe, that's something that they do very, very well there. And for me, my concern is unless we actually get in now and start to have those different conversations, we're almost working in a way where it's kind of already happened and we're working backwards. So for me, I would be very keen to hear what you think we can do to try and address that issue of parity. And lastly, in terms of the digital involvement, I'm just very concerned that, yes, of course, there is a role for technology, but from the economy side, in terms of employers, and my own background is HR and employment law, so I have my own personal experience that is much more than anecdotal. But employers really struggle to get people that are coming from either college or uni and they're lacking soft skills, maybe. So I would be very keen that we do actually ensure that there, yes, is digital provision, but also that we're giving those opportunities to young people to learn face-to-face with people to be able to do those things. So I would just be interested to hear some thoughts on that.
I think you're spot on around, we, however savvy we might be around using technology, most people will want some form of human support. And that's why, I talk about a hybrid model. What you see, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, what you see is, if you like, investment in a digital portal. Because that digital portal can form almost like a spine for people to access the resources, the information, and for people who do want to self-help, it's there. But I think you're absolutely right around the thinking about those young people and adults, perhaps, who don't have the social capital, who haven't got the networks that perhaps their counterparts might have. And this is where, if done really well, all-age career guidance can actually make such a difference in terms of social mobility, social inclusion, and I even think of my own journey, in that regard. And this is where I think we have to, in that sort of parity, we've got to sort of learn now, and Northern Ireland, this is the first time that a report, which will be published, I hope, very shortly, will show you what these other countries are doing around their digital portals, and you can leap ahead in terms of seeing how you can move forward on that to good effect. So I'll just deal with the quick digital, and then I'll talk about the thing that I'm really passionate about, which is where do the people in the communities go for the support. But if you look, for example, at Norway are now using their careers portal so that they can actually capture what are the frequently asked questions that people are when they come onto the portal. And they're using AI with guardrails around it to be able to answer those sorts of questions. We can also see in other parts where chatbots, for example, are being used in Belgium, Flanders, and in fact, this isn't a recent development there. This is a new development. So I think what I'm really encouraged by is that the Career Service now has a digital team, which it didn't have a couple of years ago, and it really is, as far as I can see, being very methodical about what would that portal look like. And I really think that portal needs to be in place, as soon as possible. And then you'll see in the report that the recommendations that I made, I did actually recommend that we should be really looking at test and learn pilots, career pilots in local areas, perhaps, with the area learning communities. And so that we can have a place-based approach. And these test and learn pilots, I think, can help us over the next year begin to learn more about, often we see in local areas, if we think about the long-term unemployed, we often see multiple agencies all targeting the same group. We could be really creative in places alongside those other support where we can have professionals training together, learning together, thinking about how we can get really good places that people will know that it's not just careers, where maybe they think, oh, well, when I was at school I had to see a careers advisor, but that we have careers, we have youth, we have health, we have models overseas, in, again, Denmark, dare I say Finland again, but we have other models where we have more multi-agency working together in the interests of the people in the local area. And I do feel that we could do something really exciting in Northern Ireland. Either look at capital spend projects where you've got new buildings, create those multi-agency centres that don't look like per services for per people, but that bring that together. And I do think that we really must think about that middle skills. The more adults that we have in Northern Ireland switching off lifelong learning, then we're just creating a problem for ourselves further down the line around as a nation, our economic prosperity and well-being.
Credentials, just, yeah, do you have any views on those? Because obviously OU are piloting some of that, and when you look at retail and hospitality, sometimes those are viewed as low skill. Kathy, Sinead and myself sit in the skills IPG, and sometimes we struggle to get over that actually those are highly skilled, critical jobs. Just wondering your view on micro-credentials and skills passports.
Yeah, I do. The answer
Sorry.
is yes. Ireland have got a very interesting, I think, approach around micro-credentials and open badges. And again, this is part and parcel, I think, of where we are now at this moment in time, that we do have to think about what we can learn from elsewhere, what we know what works here in Northern Ireland, and actually be a little bit more creative than maybe we've thought of careers in the past, which is a school experience. We've got to think about that career learning. A simple thing, for example, and it sort of links to credentials, but it's a simple thing. In primary schools, I was involved in a research project in the Midlands, and the parents said, if you give the children a sticker when they come home that says they've done something on learning about the world of work, we'll have a conversation with them. Now, that wasn't a formal micro-credential, but we can look at things like that where we can make the visibility of learning about the world of work more apparent, and I think we can harness those micro-credentials to help people upskill on their own terms as and when required.
Before we move on, I just want to welcome the children from St Patrick's and St Bridget's Primary in Ballycastle. You're very welcome for joining us today. I'm going to bring in the next member. It's Padraig. I would just say we have a bigger committee to work through today and on a big agenda, so if I can just ask members to get to the questions quickly and to as far as possible, because we really appreciate having your expertise here today, Dr Hughes, but we'll just to try and get through the inquiries in that 5-minute window, just so we have enough time to get through the agenda and hear from everyone. But it's over to Padraig.
So firstly, thank you for your presentation. It's been really detailed so far, and I think one of the themes that's come very clearly through our committee previously, but this joint committee as well, is around preventing working in silos. One of the big barriers which I would see, our party spokesperson for further and higher education, which we would constantly see, is around how schools are constrained in that they have to, in order to meet their financial commitments, they have to try and keep pupils on in sixth form. So just keen to hear firstly a wee bit more on your views on that and how we can change that, because I think that's one of the ways through this joint committee working which we can end that siloed approach. The other thing really was around, you've mentioned the journey and the career progression. One of the big things which we're hearing locally, we met with the Northwest Regional College last week, and what that was around career progression. So people who are maybe in a full-time employment now, they're looking to switch, but for them to switch role would actually mean completely giving up their job and trying something different, which obviously isn't ideal for a lot of people. But a broader point on that is around a careers audit, and what your views on that would be, where you think that would sit, because we're all very well rehearsed and very familiar with the difficulties where the shortages are, if they're in construction, if they're in these other larger scale areas. But in terms of pupils leaving school and this piece in particular that we're discussing today, I think it would be really useful to have that really detailed audit in terms of people understanding that, because quite often I'm a former teacher myself, primary rather than secondary, but a lot of times the people who are delivering the careers advice are the furthest from the workforce themselves, and obviously that you're more aware of that than I am, but I just think that presents a real difficulty in that.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. You know, it's often difficult for further education, higher education and training providers to get into schools. And there's a whole range of reasons for that. You'll know yourself from your own experience. England, of course, put legislation in place around the Baker Clause, which does require schools to give access to further education, higher education, and training providers. It's very difficult to police, but nonetheless the legislation or the clause is there and schools have to adhere to it. So I go back to the point around whether you need to put in place something that is sort of statutory requirement which ensures that FEHE can get into schools and training providers, or whether you create the conditions, the space where that can happen. So I think those barriers, you've got to find a solution to move them, and it's either the stick approach or it's the kind of carrot approach, the incentives for that. On the business of the careers audit, I'm pleased, just for clarification, you're thinking about adults that might need an audit of where they're at when you...
For schools as well, because I think that, you know, we would deal with a lot of young people who would come to our constituency office who would be wanting to go in, so placement's a big one. Young people who are maybe looking to try and get a placement in plumbing and you know, in any of those vocational areas, really, they're finding difficulty doing that. But more than that, it's really that they're going into a career and they're not really sure what the outcome is. You know, they're trying to get the kind of skills part out of the way, but not really understanding what the outcome or what the end result is.
Yes.
So I just think if we can have more detailed understanding of exactly what they need to get their outcome, and a clear defined outcome as well. But it certainly ties in with that, because one of the other pieces you'd mentioned as well was just around how, you know, young people at schools and their parents taking part in those, which I think is brilliant. But like my own experience, and Philip's isn't dissimilar, even though I'm a fair bit younger than Philip. But it was around, you know, for me, I was going into teaching. That was very clear for me, because it was going on a professional route, I suppose. So the school's guidance was get somebody in who's done that, get somebody in who's followed that path. But I'm worried that our young people who you know, aren't going down the traditional route, and particularly in terms of what you've mentioned around parents, we know a huge number of our young people who maybe don't have that parental support, or maybe don't have that history of education in their own home. I'm worried that they'll miss out in any of that as well. So how do we incorporate them into that?
I think it's really important that we think about skills. You know, from primary right through. Often we're so focused on qualifications that we almost immediately, without any intention of doing so, we have the elite, you're very bright, you'll do okay at university, and then we have the rest. I think we've got to find a way of flipping that, and I think anything that we can do, for example, to put in like an essential skills framework that can be sort of help young people to see what skills that they're accumulating, you know, over time. I was very struck when I was researching careers in primary school that often the children leave primary school and they know what sort of skills that they've got. They know what they're good at. But when they move into secondary education, sometimes they're never asked about that until they're 14, 15, and there's a real opportunity lost, which is why I kind of keep going back to, can we find the space for that sort of continuous exposure to careers? Labour market intelligence is really important. The Career Service in Northern Ireland, you've got a Careers and Information Occupational Unit that does appear to have its finger on the pulse around producing labour market intelligence. And so I think we've got to look at how could that, again, you know, there are labour market partnerships in Northern Ireland as well. So it's like, how can we make sure that we can get intelligence that is about the skills the individual has, the skills that our economy needs, and how people have made their journeys into that, which is partly why I do think we could do more on the data science around young people's journeys. Scotland, who have a much bigger budget than you have here in Northern Ireland for careers, they have a research and evaluation unit, and they track young people, they track their journeys, they're able to feed that back into the system. And I just think for young people to get exposure to role models, we're going to find more what I call misaligned actors in online platforms now, where they will claim to be a career coach, or they'll claim something that is a hallucination. And I think this is where now, if what we can do is, we know that if you're in a rural area, your chances of finding employment in that rural area are that much less than if you're in a city. I think, again, with technology, we can begin to look at how far are people willing to travel. We can use technology in an anonymised way now, and what are the occupations that they're searching for? And this is really why I think it is exciting in Northern Ireland.
I'm going to ask, before I bring the next member in, members, I'm going to need your assistance here to get to your question quickly. We want to hear from Dr Hughes, and if we have a long preamble, I may not be able to actually bring everybody in on the time that we have, so I want to make sure we get everybody. So if I could just emphasise that if we can get the question quickly, and then we've lots of time to hear from Dr Hughes. So I'll pass over to David. Unfortunately, we've had a run of economy members getting in first, but we've saved the best questions to last. So, David.
I'm coming at this from economy, and sorry for the preamble, but I want to make a couple of points. Philip's experience, my kids have just come through, and my experience is as a UCAS form. Filling, that's it, in a large grammar school in Belfast. And the difficulty I have with that, it's limited to GB and Northern Ireland universities. So the opportunities of the world are missed. It's simply UCAS. So if you want to go to CAO system at South, you're on your own. If you want to go to Europe, you're on your own, and that's limiting our thing. The other thing I want to say, I just want to tease this out, because you just as you were talking there, I come up with a different angle. But education, if we look at careers, it looks like we're mopping up problem. The education system is funneling people on failure from such a young age that whenever you get, my daughter's doing law, you're choosing people, selecting people that don't actually create wealth for Northern Ireland. They actually work and create good salaries and here, as a dad, I'm proud as punch, but there's no wealth creation. Yet the wealth creation that comes from our entrepreneurs and our self-employed and everyone else feel like failures. But yeah, so my point is that, just to pull that out, is what's the model in other places that are bringing this doing this better to create people balanced across they're generating wealth for the country as an economic.
Singapore is one of those places that have got that commitment to sort of all age career support. I think what you're describing is the haves and the have-nots in essence. And as society, I think, not just from an economic viewpoint, but from a health and well-being viewpoint, and also social prosperity, we are stacking up problems for ourselves. So I think on the international opportunities, it's so fascinating when you work with private schools from the independent sector in England, for example, where if you're not offering some international opportunities, there's something wrong. So it'll be very interesting to see, what the career service can do, is doing, may wish to do around that. I'm sure they will be best placed to say that. I think what we've got, I do have to go back to this, you've got a lot of social capital and your children benefit from that. What we have to do is think about how can we mainstream career support for young people coming through that education system, where rather than thinking, fill out a UCAS form, they're actually thinking, I met someone who, could mentor me, and I could be an entrepreneur, or I met a really skillful careers advisor who's reminded me of the skills that I've got, and I could do more than just. But it's a big ship that needs to be turned. And I do think that we just see it played out already in the news this morning about discussions about university courses and their relevance. And, you know, there are so many, I'm an entrepreneur myself, there's so many opportunities. And in Northern Ireland, maybe one of the things you could have a look at is this notion of, could you have career hubs and enterprise hubs, and if you've got employability hubs, which I suspect you might have through the local authorities, could you find a really good way of, in that place-based sort of approach, bringing those hubs together so that they can actually make, not compete with each other and make opportunities more visible?
Gary?
Dr Hughes, for obviously coming along today and for the report as well. The question that I want to ask is in relation to, and it's something that's raised at the Economy Committee very often, is around the Economy Minister's vision, good job, etc. What is a good job? And that is important when it comes to careers advice, because we all have our own definition of what is a good job. And one of the recommendations in your report relates to career-related learning beginning in primary school. So I just wanted to get your thoughts around, as I say, those that are providing the advice need to know, you know, in terms of that definition, if it's coming from the department, what is a good job? And, you know, in terms of careers learning at schools and at primary school, is it an appropriate level to get and to start working on children at that age? And I'm thinking in terms of, you know, children particularly have aspirations. You know, you've done surveys and some of them want to be footballers. And I think there's an innocence in, you know, allowing a child to be what they want to be and let kids, as I say, be kids. But it's still time for me. No, there's no hope. That's gone. I've given up on that dream. But in terms of, you know, in terms of learning across the board, are we seeing benefits of that type of activity happening in primary schools? Are we able to meet obviously the demands and the jobs and the skills that we need for the future if we're interacting with kids at that stage?
I've just recently written a book on decent work, inclusion and sustainability. I'll just mention that, but really just to say that at the heart of that is good jobs. You know, I grew up in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, high unemployment, and I could see the effect of that, not just on my family, but on community. So I'm absolutely clear that good jobs are what we need to create. If I tell you that if you look at the academic evidence on why should we at the age of 7 or 8, why not let the children just play? And we know that statistically, by the age of 7, young people, boys and girls, begin to separate out jobs that are for boys and jobs that are for girls. And what we've got to do is break down those barriers. You know, the whole STEM industry, Northern Ireland, we need more female engineers and scientists. And so for anyone who thinks maybe we should just let the children play and let's just focus on the secondary piece, in a way we're stacking up problems for ourselves. The academic research could not be clearer that, of course, children go through a fantasy stage. You know, maybe when they've said they want to be a footballer, it is a fantasy stage. But what we've got to do with these children is to help them develop mentally, help them understand the relevance of the schooling. So the work from Primary Futures in other countries has actually shown that by having this intervention of employers and volunteers coming into school, there's something about children thinking, I understand the relevance of maths now. You know, I can make a pizza and I have to weigh it out. And when I've got someone from a pizza company who's going to take my pizza and, you know, part of a competition, we can bring learning alive quite easily. And I'm a great believer that we've got to do more and start early.
No, very, very briefly, and I thank you for that. And I suppose what I was getting at in terms of the good job pieces, what we don't want is a situation where whoever's providing the careers advice at that young age is telling a child that they can't do something. So, for example, I think of a personal experience where, you know, I remember, you know, teachers saying to my parents, well, Gary's very quiet, he doesn't ask questions, he doesn't do that, he can't be that. What I'm saying is, So it's not even just in terms of aspirations. I would have concerns if the advice needs to be appropriate in terms of not ruling children out of things based on the fact that, as I say, they may not be able to speak in front of a class at that particular time. That doesn't mean they can't in the future.
There's three things in that. One is skills. Two is that if we look, for example, I've mentioned already how we can use the platform to link employers and volunteers. But three, very interestingly, in Wales and in Scotland, they're using Minecraft gaming to help teachers to break down those barriers that you've described, that no one just comes in and tells them. So rather than careers advisors coming into school, we're talking about that exposure to career learning, and we're using techniques, and a role for a careers service can be on that scalability around providing the resources that equip these teachers so that they can do that really well as a natural part of making the curriculum relevant to a changing world of work.
Thank you. Sinead, you were next. That's all the economy, just all big rush right at the start.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Deirdre, for your evidence this morning. It is absolutely really insightful, and I suppose it's kind of shining a light on how far we are when you look at the Scandinavian countries and how they have dealt with it, and they've built it up from a very young age. And I think the most ambitious people you'll ever meet are primary school children. It's astronauts. There's no limit to what they can be, and then they become limited by our system. And I suppose what I want to ask you, obviously, you mentioned the investment that we put into that careers department and how we work it. Like, we're so far away from being a model of best practice because we are investing so little, and it is a very broken system because it's over a number of departments. And obviously we had a strategy 2015 to 2020. What is your assessment on that strategy and how it hasn't delivered? I mean, we were promised a portal, we were promised a database for work experience, and actually we've actually disinvested in organisations and companies that were delivering those areas on the ground. For example, School Employers Connection in my city, it just didn't get any funding. Was working for 25 years in that area, work experience. How can we do this without investment, and how can we do it when we don't collaborate? And this is great today, collaborating as committees, but departments, they do work in silos. So I just want you to talk to the investment piece and then the collaboration piece, and what we really need to do to ensure that we are ambitious for the system, as government. And then I suppose the biggest career advisors for any child are their parents. So how do we get in there and start working with our parents in order for them to support their children as well?
Well, I think in investment, I have worked in enough countries in the world to know that you don't always just start off by saying it's only going to change if you've got more money. That we have to really look at, what are the financial inputs to the system at the moment, and then look at how can we get those, if you like, efficiency and impact gains. So I think that's the first thing I'd say on that. In terms of strategy, like every country that has a strategic forum, and indeed Northern Ireland has a strategic forum, that forum can be a really good mechanism, if you like, to really look at what progress is being made against either a strategy or a particular work plan. I am of a view that you could, in Northern Ireland, I could come and say you need a new strategy. I would much rather in Northern Ireland you come up with an action plan that will enable action to take place and move forward. And for that action then to inform a new strategy that, perhaps in this is just my personal view, But I think it would be a step backwards to think, let's spend all our energy on a strategy now. We know what the cornerstones are. We know what good can look like. So let's see, can we get a joint action plan that will move things forward? And we can measure that, on a basis either through a strategic forum or indeed there can be other mechanisms put in place.
I think that's a very helpful thought to carry on to our next briefing with the departmental officials. That it's we do love a strategy in Northern Ireland. It's something we're very, very good at writing strategies, but we're not so good at implementing them. So that's great. Thank you. So Cathy, you were looking in next.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Dr. Hughes. It's been extremely interesting, I have to say, and a lot of what I had wanted to cover, you've covered in your answers as well. There's something, and it's just, I suppose, us in the Education Committee at the minute are dealing with, it's probably our top priority at the minute is around special educational needs and children with special educational needs and the crisis that they're facing with placements and things like that. But something that has arisen recently, and even been chatting with Saoirse around it as well, around that post-19 age for those children who have left school and are sort of in this limbo, don't know where to turn to. There's a role to play for Department of Health, there's education, and there's economy within it all. There's a number of campaigns happening at the minute. No Caleb's campaign that's happening now too, and there's a lot of parents who are in this space and don't know where to turn to. Is there anything specific that you could advise on around special educational needs when it comes to careers advice?
Pleased that you've raised this issue, because I think there's something like 30,000 young people or adults in Northern Ireland that are disabled or have got special educational needs, and that's probably a conservative estimate as well. In the report that I've produced around international examples, there are some examples on SEND provision, some where again legislation has been enacted, others where there are examples of good and interesting practice. I think what's really important is that we need feet on the ground of people who will broker opportunities for young people and adults. I know the career service because when I looked at what they were doing, I know that this is one of their priority areas, and I'm sure you will hear more about that. But I think we've got to remember that those SEND young people, when they move into employment, if they can find employment, actually are often overqualified for the jobs that they're doing. So there's a real scope for us to do more campaigning around how employers can benefit from a range of people with alternative learning needs. And I do think it's in a very important area. I would have to go back and check my notes, but I do know that in the report that I've produced, there is a focus on SEND within there, and you'll see how some places are focusing again on that place-based approach. Some people are also saying, well, the technology will also allow more opportunities to be made available in a much more flexible way. But I'd be very happy to share that outside of this meeting.
I know just in my own constituencies here, just outside it actually, there's Harry's Place, and they say that all the time. If they had the ability to be able to go into schools themselves, they are a social enterprise cafe who have post-19-year-olds coming to develop their skills and their barista skills, their money skills and everything. And if they had the ability to be able to go into schools and talk to schools about careers advice and where to send these kids as well, because like you say, they're saying these kids are running rings around us. They are completely overqualified for what they're doing here, and they're obviously very limited in the amount of that they can employ too. But if we were able to get that link, I think together much more, it'd be revolutionary, I think, for here.
Hubs, careers, enterprise, employability hubs, these test and learn perhaps sites where you could focus on SEND, and certainly in London they have adopted a sectoral approach, but also targeting very specific initiatives. So there is some interesting work around bringing people together with that clear focus on that particular target group.
Has been a real focus for the Education Committee, so again I think that's one we can pick up with the officials. I thought Cathy was going to steal Ballinhinch out of my constituency there for a minute, so I'll add the shout out to Harry's Place. And they really do provide a great example, I think, of work as a community as well. Work is not just about getting a paycheck. It's there is such an important social and community aspect to sense of belonging that comes with employment that we shouldn't lose sight of. Robbie, you're next.
10 out of 10 so far, so I hope you don't drop the ball, Dr Hughes. Picking up on Cathy's point, so it's not just SEN children, but it's children with disabilities, particularly in around non-verbal. And on the Education Committee, we hear an awful lot about the role of the parent, and I know the parents have been picked up in the report. So how do we ensure that the parental voice for those children who need advocacy for longer is transported through? And I'm thinking about this not so much in terms of the school piece. I know we're talking very much about the careers piece in schools, but we have a market there where obviously the job opportunities, and want every child to have the best opportunities that they can have. Have you examined the mechanism for that? And not just disabled and SEN kids, but also children from a looked after perspective, care experience, and also those from the socially deprived background. That's the first question. Second question then moves into the portability, agility of transferable skills. Mm-hmm. They give you the context for that. In 2000 I joined the fire service, didn't have a GCSE to my name, made it to station commander, which was grand. However, today I can't join the fire service, but I have really good transferable skills. Is there somewhere within the independent review of education or something we can push that we really are radical in terms of how we create awards or lifelong abilities that some young people have?
Yeah. Firstly, on the parents, I do also think that beyond what I've said already, on the advocacy piece, further education and sort of SEN specialists, there's great scope, and higher education institutions as well. If we think about the knowledge that these organisations sit on around employers and where the opportunities are, there is a real, I think, opportunity to find a way that connects that but also brings parents into the conversation. And remember, parents are employers as well sometimes. So I do think that sort of we need to do more around career conversations with these groups of parents around, what's the reality for them, and then how can we make that connection to the opportunity structure. And I do think that there is labour market intelligence in Northern Ireland where we can actually do more around targeting employers to, quite frankly, step up and to open their doors to more placements, more work experience. Many employers will say they haven't got the skills and schools aren't preparing them. But actually there's a responsibility on those employers to be willing and open. And so any incentives that can be found to do so, great. But I do think there is a challenge there to employers. And then I think your second point was around transferable skills. If you look to Canada, for example, Canada have got a system online where anyone in Canada can actually have a look on a portal and do a little skills assessment, and then actually look at how those skills can be transferable elsewhere. I think as the labour market tightens, more employers are going to have to think more liberally around who they're willing to bring on board around past experience.
We talk about selection processes, but they're not. They're deselection processes because employers apply conditions as a filter to narrow down the pool of people. So is this where we're maybe getting to where employers perhaps could be asked to become more modern in terms of their assessment at the initial stage to try and get the right fit, which stops precluding people?
And I think upstream. To be fair, careers advisors who are out there in communities working with adults and working often are knocking on the door of employers and asking them to have fairer policies or give someone a chance. I do think there is something around, I know campaigns can sound expensive, but one of the things I love in Wales is that they came up with a hashtag called #ChangeYourStory. And that is all about giving people chances and also sort of having that dialogue with employers around recognising that people have past experience, that those transferable skills can be parachuted in. And as the labour market tightens, employers will realise that. But I think now is this moment in time where if we can get that message across, particularly for adults who are a bit fed up with work and might just throw in the hat and think, well, I'll just not bother. We need as many people as possible to enter into our labour market and re-enter into our labour market and to want to stay in Northern Ireland because it's a great place to live and they can earn a livelihood. And I think that's the vision around what really good all-age careers support. It won't solve all of the problems and it is complex, but it is worth the investment around helping to give people that different entry routes to a world of work beyond the traditional. It's a great shame that you had that skill, and yet if you wanted to go back, you couldn't go back into it.
They know what I'm like as well. It's 16 years experience. That might actually stop them from taking me back. Thank you.
Cara,
thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Dr Hughes, for such a detailed briefing. We've learned so much here in such a small amount of time. I recently met with speakers for schools to hear more about the work that they do, and I think it's fantastic that they draw upon the importance of bringing in speakers to motivate our young people and maybe talk through some career paths that they mightn't have thought about. I mean, myself, it wasn't until my early 20s I met a female politician, so maybe it wasn't something in my mind. I thought that if you can't see it, you can't be it. So just really important to include them here today. You'll be happy to know I just have two questions. The first one is around the module that is Learning for Life and Work. So you talked about the importance of finding space in our curriculum to really focus in on careers advice and talking about a young person's career and future. Do you think there's more that we can do within the LLW module? There is an aspect of it that focuses on employability. Do you think that there's more we can do there? Because in my own lived experience, I found it really unhelpful. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think we could do more. I think it's an opportunity to revisit it and to see, and at the expense of me sounding really repetitive, it's about that diet. Well, if you just put in a module, like Finland have a module for careers, but they don't just parachute it in, it's part of that systematic process, that rich diet of exposure to role models and experiences of the world of work. So the answer is yes, I think we do need to do more than that. Again, I think we can look to this exposure of role models more. New Brunswick in Canada have got centres of excellence that are sector specific, that are virtual learning environments that bring role models in and connect people. So I think we can learn from that, and of course the module in Finland that exists called TET module.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's really important when you're at that young age, you're like a sponge, you want to take in as much knowledge as possible, so it's important to get in while kids are young. Just my final question then is, we've touched on today some really interesting models from other countries. I personally finished my secondary education in the United States in California, and they had a system, GWEE, which was the General Work Experience Education module, which essentially put aside 2 hours every day of your diary, and essentially you could use that for work experience, and it acted as an incentive to get young people thinking early about their career and to get enthusiastic and excited about stepping into the world of work. And also they got paid while they were there. That was part of the program. Do you think that's something we should look at here or replicate here for the people of Northern Ireland?
I think it's certainly worth having a look at alongside the New Brunswick and the Finland model for sure. Like, I think the more we can reflect, they always say if you write something down, you're likely to remember it rather than just sit and listen. So I think the more we can within our education system get those young people that regular, remember, if they had 20 to 30 exposures, you know, each year, just think about how much they would remember compared to that just, I'm going to give you a careers lesson now on a Wednesday afternoon. And so great opportunities for us here in Northern Ireland to do some policy borrowing, but also to build on the good work that's here already and refine it and push the boundaries a little bit more around reframing what we're doing.
And it's just David is our last member to come in. We've covered a lot of ground today, so we really appreciate your time. But over to you, David, for the last question.
Thank you very much, Chair. And being last, I'm actually going to probably piggyback on some of the things that have already been drawn out, and thank you for your presentation so far in that regard. My colleague and Chair of the Economy Committee, Philip Brett, was talking earlier about the culture and how he experienced going to I too went to grammar school. We had the UCAS form, of course, but we did have a careers fair brought in. We did have careers teaching largely through Learning for Life and Work and so on as well. And it wasn't perfect, but I think we did have some good things there that helped us. But there's no doubt that, and probably it is particular to grammar schools, but not, I don't think it's only grammar schools. University is still seen in this place as the gold medal prize, the ambition that everyone aims for, and if you can't make it, then you look at your other options. And I think Northern Ireland is changing that regard. There are wider offerings, even ones coming from businesses themselves for school leavers. International examples. Do you have any good international examples of places that have been successful in changing their culture? We often hear of Germany and how apprenticeships are prized there with their automotive industry and so on. But if we're looking at models that we can look to and see success of to implement here, what would you advise?
Well, again, you know, Austria and Switzerland have done to help us. If we could undertake that regular sort of research around what are the young people's experiences, and also then what are the outcomes, where do they land, and also how long do they stay there for, and then link that back to really the return on investment. So I think there's plenty of very detailed examples in the report, which I hope will be published shortly, and you'll be able to see that. But I think culture change is only going to come about if we're creative, we have these pilots, because at the end of the day, it's leaders in education that will actually bring about the culture change. If the leader in education is fixed on what really matters is just the academic attainment and the students that go to university, then I think it will perpetuate itself. We need really good leaders that see the value of a changing society and a changing world of work where young people can really maximise their skills in a whole range of different settings at a range of different levels. And we'll get more role models and we'll get more people inspired.
Thank you. And just one other question then. In your response to Sorcia, you talked about how we can use and other examples where AI and chatbots have been used, and maybe that reflects the area that you work in as well. But you talked about the guardrails being put in place in other places. What does that look like? Because I'm not a technophobe in that regard, but I do have some concerns about young people leaning too heavily on artificial intelligence without having appropriate oversight and supervision of that.
I too have concerns, and I'm involved in the sort of AI and large language models development. So I think first of all, in terms of in the UK, it's encouraging that the heads of career services have come together to really look at what's happening on AI. And I think they're right to be cautious at this stage. So that's a very positive development. Secondly, around putting guardrails around AI. For example, you can use chatbot technology where you asked the OpenAI or ChatGPT to behave as if it's a level 6, level 7 careers advisor, which means that and you program it that it'll adhere to an ethical code of conduct. So you can put guardrails around it that will make careers information and advice more readily available, but you still have to have a warm handover to a human advisor, the point that was made earlier. So my message is be cautious. Don't jump in just immediately, because we are on that wave of AI in education, AI in the world of work. There will at some point be a trough of disillusionment where people see that it can't do what they thought it could do. And it can hallucinate, so it thinks I'm a professor at Derby University, and I worked there for 10 years, but I'm a associate professor at Warwick, so it gets it wrong. But I think what we can do is keep up to date, as indeed the digital team are doing with the careers portal, keep up to date with what's happening. The market will step in on lots of sort of tools that could be used. And I think for government policymakers, it's making sure that the market doesn't get so out of control that you have rogue traders in there that will do some damage. So I think embrace the gaming, look at the chatbot technology, and really focus on the pace of change is phenomenal around what's happening with the new ChatGPT 4.0 that was released 2 weeks ago. It's unbelievable what you can do with that. So I think keep finger on the pulse, and again, in that space, make sure that you've got some ethical codes wrapped around it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hughes. I think that has been such a wide-ranging and insightful briefing this morning. It really has been so helpful, and it's given us an awful lot to take into the next evidence session, and I think in the ongoing work of both committees, and hopefully a bit of joint working in the future on these issues as well. So we really want to thank you for taking the time to brief us so comprehensively today. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much. You do great work, and I really am very excited about the possibility for Northern Ireland to be the go-to place for innovation in this space. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So while Dr. Hughes is leaving, I'll just take this opportunity to welcome the Youth Assembly into the chamber. So it's great to have you all here, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to chat with you all later when we get a bite to eat after the committee session. So that's an incentive to make sure we get through our next session in really good time. So we have plenty of time to speak with the members of the Youth Assembly. I think at this stage it would probably be best to look at any actions arising from the concurrent committee meeting really after we've had the department in, so I'm happy to move on to the next briefing if we can bring the department officials through, and we will make a start on that. And if I could just emphasise for this briefing, I'm going to be really rigid on timing, so last thing I wanted to do was to cut Dr. Hughes off because her insights were so helpful, but I think in this session if I could really ask members to be getting straight to question, and then for the officials as well. So we'll just let the departmental officials get settled, and then we'll make a start. And while they're doing that, you can refer to your packs. So we have a briefing paper that was provided by the departments at page 187, some previous correspondence from the departments at page 208. Then there is a copy of the Preparing for Success 2015 to 20 career strategy, and that's at page 223. And then there is a joint departmental paper on the 14 to 19 framework at page 286 of your packs. So that moves me on just to be able to welcome the officials to the Assembly Chamber today. So thank you for your time, and thank you for agreeing to facilitate the joint departmental briefing on careers, education and guidance. It's very much appreciated. So with us today we have Clement Athanasiou, who's the Director of Apprenticeships, Careers and Vocational Educational Division at the Department for the Economy. We have Christina Kelly, Deputy Head of Career Strategy at the Department of the Economy. Karen McCulloch, Director of Qualifications 14 to 19 Strategy, Department of Education, and Gareth Edge, Head of 14 to 19 Strategy Team in the Department of Education. So you're all very welcome. We have, well, the numbers have reduced a little bit, so we might get through things a little quicker, but we are dealing with a bigger committee session today. So if I could ask from the officials' perspective, it's not necessary for every official to answer every question, so we just really to defer to the person best placed to answer the question. I'm going to ask you to give an oral briefing to the committees first, and I would ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, so 10 minutes at a maximum of an initial opening statement, and then we'll move to questions, and if members, just as before, want to indicate to the clerk when they would like to come in. But thank you again, you're very welcome, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, we'd like to thank the chairs and members of both committees for the opportunity to be here today with our colleagues from the Department for the Economy to discuss careers. We'd also like to thank the clerks and the departmental liaison officers for their help in coordinating the session. Thank you. In the opening remarks, I'd like to outline the nature and content of careers provision in schools and the common themes that have been emerging from recent reviews and reports before handing over to Clem to talk about the work of the Careers Service. At the outset, I just want to mention that our ministers have met to discuss careers, and that following this meeting, we have been tasked to work collaboratively to develop a joint programme of work, and Clem will say a bit more about that in a moment. So the goal of ensuring that young people have the skills, knowledge and understanding to be effective career decision makers is an enduring one. The increasing choice of career, education and training pathways available to young people and projections that citizens will change jobs several times in their career means that it's more important than ever that young people develop key employability skills and receive high quality careers education and guidance. This starts in schools, where the boards of governors and principals are required to secure a balanced and broadly based curriculum which prepares pupils for the opportunities, responsibilities and experience of life by equipping them with appropriate knowledge, understanding and skills. Careers provision in schools sits within a wider landscape of connected legislation and strategies, and those most relevant to careers-related learning were outlined in the written briefing provided to the committee. Reflecting those requirements, the offer to learners in schools should include careers education, careers information, work-related learning such as work experience, work-based assignments, visits and enterprising activities, and opportunities across the curriculum to develop employability skills. And there we're looking at literacy, numeracy, digital skills, as well as decision-making, problem-solving, teamwork, managing information. And young people should also be given opportunities for high-quality, impartial careers advice and guidance. Following the introduction of the Career Strategy Preparing for Success, the Chief Inspector's reports noted a significant improvement in the quality of careers in post-primary schools, rising from 35% to 68% of schools in which quality was evaluated as good or better. That increased again to 86% by the end of 2014 and 90% by the end of 2016. During this period, there was additional investment in careers to fund employability and work-related learning activities for pupils in the school. This funding provided opportunities for engagement with the world of work and a CPD programme for teachers. Area learning communities had also been established to support delivery of the entitlement framework, and each established a career subgroup comprising careers teachers and coordinators from the participating schools. These subgroups aim to share best practice, develop joint events for their pupils, and work together on issues such as engaging with local employers. The level of investment has been impacted by very challenging budgets, and the effects of this started to be seen in inspection. The Chief Inspector reported a decline in the quality of lessons observed in learning and teaching of both the discrete taught careers lessons and the employability strand of learning for life and work. Questions on careers in the Young Person's Behaviour and Attitude Survey have consistently found that while the majority of young people in years 11 and 12 reported feeling either confident or very confident about making decisions on their careers, a third reported that they lacked confidence. At the point the careers strategy came to an end, DFE commissioned Dr Hughes to carry out the independent review of careers guidance, which reported in 2022. During the same period, the ETI published its post-primary phase report. The expert panel, appointed by the then Minister of Education under the New Decade New Approach Agreement, published its report, A Fair Start, and the joint 14 to 19 Education and Training Framework was published in June 22. More recently, the independent panel published its review of education. and each of these has made recommendations and comments in relation to careers education and guidance. The findings of a number of other independent research studies, including NISCA's recent survey of its members, Pivotal's report, and the SSUNI's Let Us Learn report, provide important insights. Common themes have emerged across these reports in relation to careers in schools. These include the value of starting careers-related learning at an earlier stage in the curriculum, greater consistency required in the quality and quantity of careers education, the delivery of employability skills and work-related learning opportunities, increased awareness of and access to careers information, including the need for the National Careers Portal, and increased professional development for teachers. CPD has been highlighted as an ongoing issue in many of the reviews and reports. It was identified as a need for all careers teachers, and particularly those who've taken up post in the last 4 to 5 years. And NISCA's survey of its members found that 40% of careers teachers had taken up post in the last 5 years, with half of this group taking up post in the last 2 years. Opportunities for networking through the... Oh, right, okay, I'll actually... Yeah, sorry, I'll just jump to the end then. So, over the last 5 years, opportunities for policy development have been impacted by a number of events and circumstances. Everybody's familiar with the impacts on schools of COVID, action short of strike, no inspection, and challenging budgets. Circumstances are still challenging, but with the return of ministers, the ending of action short of strike, and through partnership working, we feel there is now a real opportunity for us to put a stronger focus on careers. There are many examples of effective practice and delivery models to support learners, their teachers and parents, but we need to ensure that that's captured and shared so that all learners in school experience high quality education and guidance and feel confident about making those decisions.
Thanks, Karen. Afternoon everyone, my name is Clem Athanasiou and I'm the Director for Apprenticeships, the Career Service and Vocational Education within DFE. I'm really delighted to be joined by Christina Kelly, who actually comes from a professional careers background and has a lot of strategic and operational experience from her time as an advisor, a careers manager and now Deputy Head of Service Delivery. So as has been mentioned a number of times this morning by Deirdre, effective delivery here really does depend on partnership, so just want to echo our gratitude to consider this area a bit more holistically. I'll cover 3 broader points in my opening remarks. Firstly, the importance of careers. Secondly, the work of the careers service. And third, to give a sense of the collaboration with colleagues in DE and others to enhance our service. So at a simplest level, I like to think about career services helping people to access opportunities in the economy. And there's 2 parts to this when we think about the work of the career service. So that's working with people directly in careers guidance to help them reflect on their talents, their interests, their views in the world of work, and any misconceptions they may have. And then it's bringing to this relevant expertise in terms of subject choices, pathways, and labour market information. So this helps people to understand their options, consider longer term approaches, and also what they want to do in terms of that crucial next step. I think that these services have been somewhat undervalued because we know how important they are to really important lifelong decisions that will have a major impact on well-being, individual security and our collective economic prosperity. But I definitely feel, and I think this committee is symptomatic of that today, that there's a growing sense of importance of these services. And I think this is for a range of reasons, but I want to highlight 3 headline factors. The first is it's really important that we enhance social mobility. Not everyone has access to the same level of support and knowledge within their environment, and career services can help underrepresented groups tackle some of those stereotypes that they may have internalised, and to think about how they too can access opportunities across the economy. And I think this is really important from a social justice and equality perspective, but also from an economic development one. As Deirdre mentioned earlier, we don't have enough young people, so we have to think differently about talent. Secondly is the pace of change in our economy, and we've mentioned megatrends already today like AI and automation, and the OECD estimate that 1/3 of jobs in the UK will either disappear or change dramatically due to automation alone. And then we've got a lot of young people here today, and I understand they could well be economically active for over 6 decades. So we have to think about how the world of work is going to change and how we embed careers as a lifelong skill. And thirdly, and relevant to other areas I'm responsible for, I know our economy is really hungry for skills, and I think we've seen this materialise in terms of the growth of areas like higher level apprenticeships. So this means there's a greater importance of ensuring that young people are more aware of the full range of options rather than the simpler transition points there may have been in the past. And I give a very brief overview of what the service does. As has been mentioned today, there is a wide all-age career system out there, and we work hard to collaborate with all partners, but we're responsible for the career service itself. So the service has an annual budget of $7 million as of last week probably, and this mostly goes to staffing costs. I want to unpack what we mean by a careers advisor, because we use that term quite a bit. So all of our advisors hold relevant level 6 careers guidance qualifications. They have an obligation to undertake regular CPD and make regular employer visits. They have access to the latest labour market intelligence and information and have to be members of the Careers Development Institute. All of our advisors must be impartial and work in the best interests of the client that they're working with. And their expertise enables them to really engage with empathy, to try and understand what the individual's drivers are, their situation, and how they can connect that to their future within the labour market. I have to say I'm really proud of the work of the careers advisors. I know they've navigated some really difficult times recently with COVID and staff shortages, but I've seen firsthand the dedication and expertise they bring and the life-changing impact that this work supports. I think this is backed up by, as what Deirdre mentioned earlier, CEDIFOP, who commended our service during the pandemic. The recent independent review, which noted comparable outcomes with systems of much higher levels of per capita investment. A recent research report that we publish hopefully next week that highlighted a positive return on investment, and then our accreditation by Matrix, which is an international standard on careers quality. So we deliver an all-age career service, but support for school pupils is definitely a priority, and this is because they're in a really important transition point in terms of subjects and pathway options, and this is underpinned by a wide range of partnership agreements with virtually every post-primary school. We deliver career services to around 95% of pupils in their final year of compulsory schooling, and to give a sense of scale, to date that's around 22,000 pupils have received this service. Whilst we try and provide this comprehensive model to all pupils, it is important we prioritise learners who've got additional needs. So for young people with a statement of special educational need, we also provide more focused support through transition plan meetings, reviews, and we supported around 2,500 such meetings this year. I'll then turn to adults, and I think that we've noted earlier that careers transition points will be a...
Need to probably just we'll finish the point, absolutely, but just to move to the end of the presentation, just so that we get time for everyone to ask questions, if that's possible.
Okay, I'll maybe just cut to some of the reform work we're taking forward, and then I'll look ahead. So, with the backing of both ministers, we are exploring about how we can make system-wide improvements to the career system, and in particular how we work more effectively with partners. But there are a range of strategy documents that we've noted already, and we have a number of reforms that are currently underway. So we recently launched a new Careers Advisors pilot, and this is really important to ensure we've got the supply of skills we need to deliver the service and the reforms we're talking about. We have a really high quality and rich evidence base that we shortly release to inform operational and strategic reforms. We also have a project to try and develop shared standards, and this is very much a first step to try and build that ecosystem that is so important. We've also concluded a recent SPRI project that delivered innovative and successful solutions to better support clients who are autistic. And we've mentioned the portal a number of times during this briefing session, and I think, as Deirdre mentioned, this is going to be the spine of our new system. That project is underway, and we're currently working with stakeholders to really understand users' need. So I think taken together, these projects are actually quite an ambitious package of reform, but following the tasks set by ministers, I think this gives us a much better platform for deeper and wider collaboration to really tackle some of the challenges we've mentioned earlier on today. So really looking forward to our discussion today and engaging with the committee in due course on this. Thanks.
That's great, and thank you. And I'm sorry to have to rush presentations, just very, very conscious of time with the larger committee setting today. I would just remind members we're at risk of losing quorum, so if everybody was able to stay to the end, that would be great. We're close to that, unfortunately. Look, thank you for your presentations. The question I wanted to ask was really just on the back of Clement's sort of closing remarks there around next steps. One of the clear takeaways from Dr Hughes' evidence was that we definitely don't need another report, we definitely don't need another review, and possibly don't need another strategy, that we need an action plan. I know from questions that I've asked around the 14 to 19 strategy, of which careers is a very key element, it's been clear from those answers that neither the Department of Economy or Education were of a mind at that stage to publish an action plan. It was being cited as an internal document. I think as elected reps, it's good to know what a department's actually planning to do. So when will there be an action plan, and when will we be able to see it?
In terms of the particular area, we were tasked not so long ago by both ministers to deliver to define a joint programme of work that will look much more about how we don't just enhance what we do within my area of, say, career service and what careers education looks like, but how we develop the system overall. When you look at the wide range of strategies in the evidence base, I think there's some very clear front-runner themes that are there around how we develop the sense of the key careers ecosystem. So this means what are the roles of the key players and how do we better support them to make the most of that, and how do we make better use of the expertise and the resources that are out there. What's our service delivery model look like, including how do we make the most of innovation and use some of the new tools that have been mentioned in the briefing session earlier on. How do we enhance our work with different partners? And I think the final point on that would be around how do we embed engagement. So we've talked about this all-age career system in many different settings, many different types of needs. So it's really important that we have clear engagement structures to understand what stakeholders need, and we build that into solutions. So we're actively working on that across our two teams, and we hope to bring this to our ministers as quickly as possible and then to the committee for further discussion.
So if I could just come in there, I mean, I'm not sure I got an answer to the question of whether we're going to get an action plan. So I think you've referenced that careers has potentially been an overlooked service. It has maybe existed in silos up to now. Conscious that there have been many reports with a lot of recommendations that don't appear to have been implemented. I'll say the careers portal as an example. While it's encouraging to hear there is work ongoing, it has been a very long time coming. Aware of a lot of vacant posts in the service as well. So it's really just to, in terms of elected members, being able to scrutinise what's being done between the two departments. Are we going to be looking at a joint action plan between economy and education, and when will we see it?
I wouldn't like to put a firm date on it, but it is something that we have prioritised between the work of our teams. We're calling it a joint programme of work because an action plan is a very distinctive thing, but some of these actions are already underway as well. But certainly there will be a document which sets out how we're going to collaborate across our departments to enhance the career system, and we hope to have that with you as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get bogged down in terminology either. If a programme of work, an action plan, but something that we can hold the work, use to hold the work to account.
I mean, as you said, Chair, we've got lots of evidence, and Dr. Hughes has talked about that. And we've got lots of potential solutions to the issues. So we know, for example, the evidence is saying careers, if it's going to be progressed, it has to be a priority for the school. We have to have a clear and effective programme. People have to know what that is, and they have to be part of developing it as well. So we are engaging quite a lot with people, through the NISCA, which is the Northern Ireland Schools and Colleges Careers Association, which brings all of the careers teachers together to try and work with them to develop things. So yeah, it's not going to be like a strategy, it's a programme of work to take things forward. And
we will watch this space. I think Gary had indicated.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to you all, obviously, for coming along and presenting to us. And just on the Chair's theme as well, in respect of obviously the review which we have been discussing prior to yourselves. In terms of there's quite a number of, obviously the challenges are outlined, but also there's a number of recommendations that was published in 2022. Have those recommendations been assessed and costed? Have you looked at what would be the cost of implementing these recommendations? Have any bids been made to either department in terms of progressing them? But also in terms of, has there been any assessment done in terms of the particular recommendations as to those, obviously you'd have to have costed them, but those with low cost, but sort of that could have the maximum impact? So I just want to get your assessment, obviously, in the 2-year period that we've had since that's been published.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the recommendations are there and work has been progressed on some of them. For example, you know, they're starting careers earlier. I mean, we were able to source some funding through the Fair Start. So we've been able to take forward the first part of the Primary Futures programme that Dr Hughes was talking about, which was the Drawing Your Futures. That did require funding. There are examples there where, for example, the work around the ALCs, that's something that we are trying to strengthen, not by necessarily more funding, but by bringing people into that forum so that the groups are working collaboratively together. So we've got careers teachers and coordinators there. They are working as well with labour market partnerships. Some of them are doing that. The EA officers are in there, and we're talking about how we can engage the careers advisors in that as well. So some of it's about making better use of what we've got. And there's a comment that was made in Dr. Hughes' report about trying to avoid duplication as well. Where information already exists, it's about making sure that gets to the right people when they need it. So if you've got careers teachers in each school, you know, we don't want 192 people researching something that's already there. So it's about making sure that we make best use of what's already there.
Okay, I suppose then to follow on again, if you don't mind from the chairs, I would have concerns just in terms of, obviously, what these recommendations mean in terms of the cost of implementing them. I think that there needs to be a bit of work done there, but I go on further to the point about the action plan. Without an action plan, then there's going to be no effective way for MLAs to benchmark what progress has been made. And I take completely what you're saying, and a lot of good work has been done, so I'm not in any way, this is not an attempt to criticise what has went on in the past. I think we have to look to the future and try and address what has come out of this report. But I would say that both ministers need to come forward with a clear, identifiable action plan. As I say, the collaboration is one thing, but we've been listening to that for many, many years in terms of working together. But I would just urge you, as I say, to bring forward an action plan so we can mark the progress going forward, and something we will follow up in the future. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Cathy, you are next.
Sure. Again, much like the other speakers there, I do really welcome that there is this collaboration, and it's really positive that this report has been done. And I welcome as well that you did mention children with additional needs and special educational needs. The Education Committee have made no bones about it, that it's their priority in terms of the huge increase that we're seeing now in terms of placing these children. And the system seems to date to have been unable to cope with that huge wave that's coming in. Now, what is being done to proactively plan for this pool of children that, you know, we're going to continually have, who need proper careers advice, but also then need appropriate places to go when it comes to post-19 and into employment that comes along after that? And then, on a slightly different note, has there been any progress made in terms of All-Ireland cooperation? I know that obviously we can see that the all-island economy is growing, but in terms of further and higher education, I know the difficulties around if you study a foundation course, for example, in the north, what's the possibility of progressing onto an undergraduate course in the south from that?
I'll take the second one first, and
no worries.
Do it that way if that's okay. So, yes, there has been. I think one of the major issues there was about the points that were required then for going down something. Now that they have done quite a lot of work down in the Republic of Ireland on that, and they made an announcement last December that they are changing that, and that has already been adopted by the technical universities, and it's been considered by the other universities. And it means, we were in a position where even your 4 A levels at high grades weren't getting enough points, but that's what they've reviewed so that there's more opportunity. I think they're taking, I'm not sure of the exact detail, but I think it's that you can do your 3 A levels and maybe an AS there or an extended project or something. So that has been done. And then the applications office people who manage all of that, we were at an event last week in the NISCA conference, and they came and made a presentation on that. And this was attended by about 150 of our careers teachers in schools. So that information was available to them. They did an open session, and then they did an extra session to give more information on it. So that's in the pipeline. On the SEN transitions piece, as you'll know from engagement with the Director of Inclusion from the department, there is the end-to-end review, and SEN transition is one of the areas that has been looked at as part of that. And that there is a working group that's been established, and that includes people from Janice has probably spoken to you about it, but the Education Authority, Public Health, Department for Communities and Department for the Economy attends that. And they have recently conducted a survey of practitioners and parents to better understand what their experience is of the current process and to seek review options for potential solutions moving forward. So it is on the agenda, and again, working collaboratively with the range of policymakers, but talking to the people who are most impacted by it. I don't know if you want to say.
Yeah, I'll be cover a couple of these points and pass across to Christina as well. I think the SEN challenge is significant, and we're thinking about that within our own delivery model. So trying to be innovative and creative schools around the greater use of group work and other interventions, so we can provide capacity for those more focused transition plan meetings and yearly reviews, so that we can give that additional support. I know whenever I'm meeting with careers advisors, I often see the vital role they play to help what can be a really anxious time, but working out what that next step is. But Christina's actually our rep on the transition script, so maybe pass across, talk about some of the detailed work alongside the work we do around navigating the cross-border.
Yeah, well, to touch on both, firstly for children with special educational needs, disability and health conditions, operationally on the ground, our careers advisors are working in all post-primary schools in Northern Ireland, including special schools, and also in the alternative education provision, which is the education other than at school. And we do have a priority focus. Mainly we work with Year 12 students because that's a key transition point for children after their GCSEs. But stepping back from that, we begin our work in Year 10 with children at the age of 14 who have a special educational need, where the school invite us to attend the transition plan meeting. And that's really a meeting with usually the child at centre, the parents, and it could be a multidisciplinary team depending on the nature of the disability or the special educational needs. So we contribute in Year 10 to...
Is that entirely at the school's invitation, or is it just a set process that you attend as a matter of course? Is it the school's discretion?
The school have responsibility for inviting us, and it's in the code of practice, and that code of practice is currently being revised and updated. But there's an obligation on the school to invite in the career service as the external, independent, expert, impartial contributor to the discussion.
Portion actually do take up that.
Yeah. Well, this year alone, this current academic year, our careers advisors, we know from our stats that we have attended 2,500 between transition plan meetings and annual reviews. The annual reviews take place in each academic year beyond Year 10, right up until the child leaves school, which in special school can be up until the age of 19. But we would continue our work with those young people, and in particular their parents, to ensure that they have the support and understand all of the career pathway and options that are open to children, and that they're prepared and planned for the next step in their career pathway, whatever that might be. And then in relation to cross-border work and cross-border partnership working, particularly in those border towns. So the career service operationally on the ground, we're based in 25 locations right across Northern Ireland. And we would find typically in Newry, Enniskillen, Strabane, Derry, the border towns, that there is a lot of movement, particularly across to the IT colleges like Letterkenny, Dundalk, Sligo, and we would work very closely with those organisations, the Atlantic Technological University. We ensure that our advisors are familiar with the Central Admissions Office, which is the alternative to UCAS for the South. And then increasingly it would be our experience that a lot of young people across the whole of Northern Ireland are considering university options across Europe, because there are a number of higher education institutions in Italy, France, Poland, all over, who teach English, or in English, and also the tuition fees and the costs. There's a huge variation. So in the course of the guidance that we will provide to our clients, we will cover all of the options, again appropriate to the client, and that will include opportunities and career pathways and options in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, and at times right across Europe. That's part of the work that we do. We also have access to, I'm trying to remember the name of it, UK ENIC, because we do quite a bit of work with refugees, asylum seekers, and people who need, clients of all ages, who need help with qualification equivalencies. So we have access, we pay for that service, and we can help those clients to have their qualifications interpreted and also find out what the UK equivalency is, in order that we can support them with their application to whatever the option is that they want to go on to.
I want to close at this stage, and apologies, I did cut in earlier, so it was partly my fault. Sinead, if you want.
How do you ensure that there's a standard approach across all of Northern Ireland? Because there is a variation as it stands today. So what work are you doing and with the recommendations from Dr Hughes in order to have a high quality standard that is available to all?
Each year we develop our career service offer, and recently, actually in the last couple of weeks, we've developed the career service offer for schools for the next academic year. So we're always planning ahead for the next academic year, and that is to ensure that the offer of the Department for the Economy's career services support is consistent and the same for every school. And then we allocate our staff resource across those 25 locations accordingly to meet the demand of the schools in each of those sort of 25 areas and broader areas. Then also in relation to adults, we're represented in all 11 labour market partnerships. We're based in all of the jobs and benefits offices in terms of referrals from Department for Communities. So there's consistency of service offer there in relation to referrals from DFC in relation to adults who require support, and in terms of working with the labour market partnerships, which are based in the 11 district council areas. They run bespoke and dedicated employability initiatives that are local to each area, and our careers advisors in all of those areas, all of those 11 locations are represented on the labour market partnerships. So we have a consistency of service offer for young people in terms of our offer to schools. We have a consistency of service offer to adults, and then of course adults can also access our service, and indeed young people, through our careers web chat, telephony and email.
I would just add into that, sort of, May, I think what your question is probably at the heart of what the Minister has tasked us to do. So there's lots of work within our own individual areas to try and enhance quality and standardise that. But mentioned earlier about the pace of change in the economy and how long people will be economically active for. So there must be a well understood high quality universal access that goes right across the piece. And I think that's the big challenge within this programme of work we're discussing. And we're certainly keen to do our role and to consider how we can better utilise the expertise and the resources that we have to help other players within that.
Can I tease this one out a wee tiny bit? There is a risk now. I mean, it's great that both departments are working together, but there is a risk that you work at cross purposes and have done so in the past, and it has had a negative outcome, particularly in the standard, as I say, of careers advice. How can you ensure that, you know, the two departments and the two ministers are committed to the career development and career education and careers advice. If they have different pools within their department, because there is, you know, undoubtedly, and I suppose, you know, would it not be best for one department to take the lead and have joint legislation to make sure that the outcomes are evenly distributed and there is no ministerial or departmental tugs?
It's really, I mean, it's a difficult trade-off. If you think about like our career service, it looks towards education, but it also looks towards the economy and the labour market and the work of DFC.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'd be very hard to find a single place to house it. I think what's unique about our career service and why I want to think about how we can use it a bit more effectively across wider partners, it is the only part of the system that does not have an agenda. So they will work with the client, understand their interests, their drivers, then they'll bring the labour market information and try and understand what's best for that client. So it uses the intelligence from the economy, but it certainly isn't driven towards a particular outcome.
Could I just add?
And maybe you can speak to this, Karen. I mean, one of the concerns I have, picking up from what Sinead's saying, is that schools have so much independence in Northern Ireland. They're really, really free. They can take or leave this service ultimately. They're not required to. So how then, even if you have, you know, an absolutely, you know, stellar grade A service that's on offer, if schools don't take it up, then there are going to be children in Northern Ireland that don't access it. And schools may have their own reasons, timetabling pressures, particular ethos or focus on how they do careers guidance. It is a concern. So I mean, I think it's a really key point of how we actually ensure all children and young people can access this.
Or higher education as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of players with lots of agendas, and it's very difficult to see that coordination and collaboration without legislative direction.
Do have partnership agreements, as Christine's set out there. I think the way that we're trying to tackle it, that we're hoping to, is exactly as Clem said. So the focus has to be on that young person at the centre of it. Mm-hmm. So what we're thinking, if you have it set out as a young person, and then there's going to be in the primary school, key stage 1 and 2, through post-primary, and then going onwards, and that's where we kind of overlap a bit in parts of it. But there should be a clear framework as to what is the expectation, what should a young person receive at each point in that, and this then brings in, and not just what should that young person receive, but who should be delivering it, and where's the support and training for those people, and that's how we kind of want to set it out. So it's a commitment to the young person or the citizen at the centre of it, and then you get something like the careers portal, and it's, well, how can we use that tool to support all of that as well? So we're kind of, in a diagram, it's like this journey along, and being really clear about the expectation, what the outcome should be, and who should be doing it.
It does come back to our discussion earlier.
We do need to draw a line at this stage, because I know the Youth Assembly are waiting for us as well. So apologies to have to cut that one short, but I think in terms of actions arising, which will have to be taken forward at next committee meetings, just due to quorum, that's certainly one to pick up on. David, you were looking to come in?
Before I ask a question, I just want to pick up one thing that Cathy asked about the SEO system. That's not accurate. There was a report done, that's all. There was no, so that fourth A level still 25%, the value of the other three. It's something the department need to, the technical universities always give more to that fourth A level, so it's something the department really need to get on top of as well to create those opportunities. But you've said, so Northern Ireland's economically, our industries are changing, and coming from an economy point of view in this, and what you've said is teachers give the information and it has to be well understood, and you've referenced economic change, but what teachers or what practical experience or training are teachers given to actually deliver that on the new industries in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I think so. This has been an increasing area of focus in the career service. We have an occupational information unit which really actively sources information, engages with employers, and that's translated into really high quality sectoral bulletins that are housed on NI Direct, but I don't think that they get enough focus there, and that's one of the opportunities the portal offers. I think when we map out that framework that Karen mentioned earlier, I think a key question is, what support do those teachers need? As Karen mentioned, like most of them, a significant proportion, they've started that role fairly recently out of their education. They haven't had an awful lot of support or CPD, and we can look at the rich examples as Deirdre walks into the room again, like in Estonia, where there is a hub where all this CPD material is made available for teachers, and you can really make it much easier for them to deliver their role.
Yeah, and I think the survey that the NISCA people did of careers teachers was exactly that. They want training, especially for those newly appointed people. They want opportunities to network and find out what each other does in terms of their action planning and careers fairs and engagement with parents particularly as well. So looking for that, and they're definitely looking for more from employers as well.
So the question then is, what is the department doing? You've told us what the teachers want, and you've told us what the kids or the young people want. We know what our industry wants, but what is the department doing to actually deliver that?
Well, that's through this programme, this work programme that we're doing. So we recognise what the issues are. We know the potential solutions, and now is a real opportunity. We have ministers there who determine policy. We have action short of strike ended. Now it is a really good time to do it, and we've got some really good evidence.
Okay, I just want to go slightly further then with that. I come from business, and I had an employee, and I'm going to call him Gareth because it could be any single one of them. But Gareth's a bricklayer, and he came through school. He's wearing a good salary. He's actually earning more than all of us sitting here, right? But he feels like a failure. Because that's how he was made feel through school. At all times, what delivery of careers advice at a very, very early age can actually allow Gareth to feel confident in himself and have the ability to excel in life, because that is an experience from school in the classroom from very early age in a careers process.
In terms of curriculum delivery, so we have our entitlement framework, which really puts a clear steer on, that general and applied are equally valued. I mean, it is a requirement for schools to offer a third of their courses general, a third applied, and then the other third, depending on the needs of the learners. I think, of course, we've had we are going to do a survey, an omnibus survey this year with the schools, and ask more information about how the careers and everything are delivered, and what their model is for that, and what their work experience model is, to get a bit more information. But I think, as I said, there is kind of a cultural thing in there as well. And we are starting to hear differences, much more interest in kind of particularly the higher level apprenticeships and what potential there is there. And it's just about making sure particularly parents have that information to inform decisions, because they are a huge influence. I think in the young person's behaviour and attitude survey, I think it came out that 80% of young people said that was the main influence on them.
I think there definitely is something about how we value skills, and that's been a long-term issue. I remember being part of an apprenticeship forum with international representation. I remember the Swiss contact said he was the black sheep of the family because he went to university and he wasn't picking up a skill, and that has implications for transitions, as Robbie was mentioning earlier. Whenever you are skilled and highly experienced in one area, how do you convert that? In other jurisdictions, you would say, here are my skills, and that would be understood. So I think there is a wider challenge there. I definitely think there's cause for optimism, though. I look at apprenticeships and I see how differently it is regarded. I get kids coming and asking me about how can I access apprenticeships. I see our numbers last year, 30% increase in APSNI, 39% in HLAs. So I think that's starting to come through. So we can think about how can we utilise those employers who are already thinking differently about skills and bring those more into that school system, so they can see a wider range of what success looks like. And that's one of the opportunities I think the ministers have given us with this platform of work, that we can connect those systems.
David, you're struggling to make your mind up, but you do want to come in? Yep. Okay.
I've a couple of times there, and I think, to be honest, most of it has been covered off, maybe because it was really about going on with that cultural idea that university, as I said earlier, university is the sort of gold medal, and everything else is what you do if you can't get to university. And I was going to ask, have we seen change on the ground? You just said essentially, yes, we are seeing a change, which is very positive and very, it's great to hear that. I guess what I relatively speaking, an advocate for sort of independence of schools and so on, but I do see the tension between that and trying to make sure that even in schools where quite a lot of schools prize pupils going on to university, use that as a yardstick by which they judge the success of the schools, and that in itself can have negative consequences for how pupils then are feel pressurised to go down a route that maybe isn't best suited to what they want to do in future. I suspect there's an awful lot of people, I expect I was one of them actually, went to university because that's just what you do. I picked a degree that wasn't leading me anywhere in particular, but was just something that I was good at, that I was interested in, and would get me a degree that I could go and get any general undergraduate job. What can we do in schools to ensure that at an earliest possible stage that children and pupils are aware of those other options, and that they're not substandard to universities, they're just different options, and that in many ways they can lead you into those careers in a better route than university necessarily will?
From that school perspective, I think there is an important part there about engaging early with parents in this process, and we have seen some really good examples of that. So where a school has run a careers fair or event during the day, and then parents have come along in the evening, and the feedback we're getting is they're really well attended. So it's the opportunity for that to happen as well, I think, in a school. As you say, we are trying to promote this equality and equity and parity of pathways. So parents is a really important starting point, and then making sure, I think that's why it's also very important that they do receive that impartial, independent advice from the careers advisor, so that's part of the diet of a good programme of work, careers work in a school.
Yeah. And if I can just add to that, our careers advisors have been working in schools all this year. Every week there'll be someone today. Our focus in schools is to complement the careers education that the school has delivered, and to offer a range of different guidance interventions to support pupils to make them effective career decision makers, to take autonomy and control over their own career planning. And in the course of the work that we do, we are completely impartial. We are client-centred. It's personalised for each individual child, and we will cover all of the options that are available to that child if it's in year 12, which could be staying on at school, it could be leaving, going to another school, it could be going to a further education college, into skills for life and work, an apprenticeship. We cover all of the options, and they are individualised to each child, and that's our job. And the advice that our advisors provide is underpinned by robust labour market information, because we get all of the updates from the economists within the department. We have the bulletins from our team in COIU, and our advisors also undertake industry visits throughout the course of the year, where they go out into companies, into industries, into firms. They talk to employers about the work that's going on here, the type of people that employers are recruiting, the skills that they're looking for, the challenges that they're facing, and they bring that knowledge then back into the work that they're delivering directly to pupils.
I just may add something final to that, and just to connect the question around cost to this, and I think this really shows you some of the opportunities which don't have big budget outcomes. So we have parental resources already, but they're not really connecting with the parents because of where they're housed, and then I direct. We also are going to develop new direct access channels through the portal so that everybody can source this information directly. I know from speaking with apprentices, they're really keen to be ambassadors and tell their story and to give people relatable examples that they can aspire to. And I think, again, UCAS has been mentioned a number of times. Most kids will have a session about this is how you navigate UCAS. We can provide the resources for this is how you navigate apprenticeships. I know I'm biased, but other similar pathways could have a similar type of session. So I think there's big opportunities in that area.
I think the last indication I've got is Robbie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as I can. I'm just going to go back to the two questions. I'm going to put them in a different context that I give the doctor, if that's okay. So the first one is in regard to children with a special education need or a disability, or looked after children. And in regards to that, as Dr. Hughes says, a strategy isn't necessarily what we want. It's an implementation plan. But if we don't have targets and clear targets and ambitions for those young people, we've nothing to benchmark it on, and we're doomed to failure. Does this report include, or does the department intend to include, ambitious targets to increase the employability opportunities for those young people in the future? That's the first question. And the second question, and then I'll give over. And this isn't a poke, because I genuinely don't know. But this goes back to the point about transferable skills. And you've talked, Clem, and yourself, about the careers advisors. Is that the right term? Okay. And it says in here the professional, but it also says most of them at postgraduate level. Are you saying that that's an indication of their professionalism? And is that the entry point to being a careers advisor? And then I'm going to challenge you to consider, is the department and is the civil service, should they not be the drivers that actually academic qualifications isn't the gateway, but actually what we're looking is those transferable skills? And I'm thinking particularly from the perspective of people who I've worked with who bring serious world experience, firefighters, prison officers, butchers, and that type of thing, and the multiplicity of that. But if you don't have a degree, you don't have the A-levels, so where's the civil service in this? Thank you.
Element first, I'll pass across to Christina and colleague Dave around the SEM work. So we're really excited at the moment about a new trainee careers advisor pilot, that we have the first new trainees started with us last month. And as somebody who's responsible for work-based learning and apprenticeships, it's wonderful to actually be an employer in this space alongside somebody who's just advocating but actually has no proper skill in the game. And that we took as an inclusive approach as we could to allow as many people to access that opportunity as possible. And we were really inundated with high quality applications from a wide range of backgrounds. So we have 6 people in at the moment, and they come from a wide range of backgrounds, lots of different skills and talents. And then they will do the formal careers qualification alongside their getting their experience over the next couple of years. So we've had a really positive start, and we'd be keen to see more of that. And in my apprenticeship role, I'm working with colleagues in DOF about how we can try and really advocate and make it simpler for wider areas in the public sector to take similar approaches, so that we're getting the supply of skills that we need, but we're also making sure that those delivering those skills make the most of the full range of talents that are around, rather than that narrow sense of what good looks like.
Okay, and if I can just add to that, the qualification that the trainees are undertaking at the minute is the QCF Level 6 qualification, and there isn't a requirement to have a degree in order to undertake that qualification. But the qualifications that we stipulate, the QCF Level 6 being one, and other qualifications whenever we go to recruit externally, are the qualifications that are required by the Career Development Institute, of which all of our advisors are a member. And we want them to be a member because they are professions, and also we adhere to the Career Development Institute Code of Ethics in terms of the practice and the work that we do with clients.
Is there an opportunity for learning to qualify for that level 6 at all? Do you know, a lot of people with a lot of experience will have a lot of experience but will not have the level 6 qualification that says, is there, maybe I'm asking the wrong.
There would be,
yeah.
And it depends on the different learning providers that deliver. So at the minute, our trainees are undertaking the qualification with the Career Development Institute. They're one of the providers, but there are others. But having a first degree is not a requirement, and those institutions also recognise accredited prior learning as part of their entry criteria.
Brilliant, thank you.
And just, I'm very conscious of your time, Chair, but it's just to pick up on the point about measuring success. Yes, I think what we have to be really careful about is that whatever we're measuring is meaningful and actually drives improvement. And I think that's something we have to learn, because people will work to whatever it is we set. We have to make sure that's right, and I think that's where we need to work with all those stakeholders about what it is we're actually going to be monitoring and inspecting and reviewing.
Didn't pick it up. So in terms of our workforce at the moment, it is underrepresented with people with a disability, learning disability. Young people from a care experience background are underrepresented in university, and now we have some in the draft programme for government. Previously we have a target particularly in around care experience children for universities to pick that up, but I'm thinking if we do this careers advice and we do a piece for SEN disability, it can't just be it can't just be to have tick the box at this stage in their lives. There has to be there needs to be a target that we want to increase the numbers of, and that's, I know you can't set the ceiling on it. I get that if that's what you're, don't want to set the ceiling, but improvements year on year.
We need to make sure, is it the right thing we're going to be measuring and targeting on, and say where's the baseline position? It's just making sure we get that right in terms of setting those targets. But I mean, that'll
be part of what we're doing, I imagine.
Well, we'd have to have a look at that, you know. But I think as well, if you take even the work that we do through the Young People's Behaviour and Attitude Survey, asking questions of young people, we could do more analysis of who's saying what and where the need is. We say we've got a third of young people who say they need more to feel more confident. Well, who are they? I had a quick look. The figure that was coming out was girls were less confident than boys, you know. But there's more information we could get from that.
I think part of the opportunity with this programme of work is to really define what it is we're trying to achieve and make sure that all the different parts are pointed that way. And again, reflecting on apprenticeships, we've got a really important role there to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible, and we're supporting those transitions. Maybe some groups are underrepresented in our system at the moment, so that growth is good, but is it fully representative? And I think that this plan can actually reflect some of those wider areas and bring those into play.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, guys.
Include, I think, by saying in terms of the evidence session before we wrap up formally, I think there's definitely a theme coming through that both committees want something they can really monitor and really hold to account. A programme of work can be updated on, reported on, but it's hard to know whether it's actually delivering. And I think maybe we're getting bogged down in a choice of language, but I do think, given that there's just a very long history to this in terms of reports, reviews, recommendations not being delivered on, taking up what Dr Hughes had said is that we know exactly what good looks like. We know what it looks like, so it is time to do it. And I just draw a little concern on the lack of a clear plan that's going to emerge from this.
A clear plan. I think there's already a lot of work underway, and we want to set clear direction across some of those themes that have already been referenced. But as I mentioned, engagement is going to be so important. So if we're going to support underrepresented communities, we have to have space within this work to engage with them and ensure that work can be updated in line with their needs. I think that there is a bit of evolution here where we want to set clear direction, but also provide that space for engagement and co-design.
Yeah, well, I think the committee need to see that. You know, I think that's really important, and I think knowing that there is a 14 to 19 strategy action plan somewhere, you know, lurking around the department somewhere that we're not getting access to, just I think does leave a wee bit of concern. But we'll draw a line, I think, at that point. I think in terms of follow-up actions, that is one we're likely to look at. We really do appreciate your time, and again, facilitating the joint briefing from the two departments, and we've covered a lot of ground, so we appreciate your time today. So thank you, and hopefully it'll not be the last engagement with the two departments together. Thank you. While the witnesses make their way out, that really there is usually what we would pick up here would be any actions arising, but we don't have quorum to make decisions. So I think through the two respective clerks, we will pick up suggested actions, and the committees can agree on that, and we'll take that from there in terms of where we go next with this. So that moves us to item 6 of any other business. Are there any other items of business that a member wants to raise? No. And that then is item 7, date, time and place of next meeting, of which there is none confirmed at this moment in time, but there may well be one in the future. So I've just put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Members agreed? Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Assembly chamber. Sound. 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 Assembly chamber. Sound.